change the fucking personnel. Change the fucking personnel!
And I don't see Mitch Marner ever returning near a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey ever again.
Mitch Marner is the heartbeat of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Doing all these things that are great until it gets tough, and then he's gone.
And that might be because he knows this is the end of the road.
Leafs fans are lining up to drive you to Pearson. And now here we are, with our dick in our hand, pissing into the wind!
Yep, that sounds about right. In a world where the hockey gods give us mere mortals conversations aplenty to have amongst our dearest of comrades, it's about that most of them revolve around a player that isn't even the best player on his team. But why is Mitch Marner the most talked about player in hockey right now? Could be a number of things. It could be his amazing presence in the regular season, it could be his complete absence in the playoffs, it could be a rift with the city of Toronto, or all of the above. It's all of the above. But a story like this doesn't get told without the full context. Strap in. We've got a decade of contract negotiations, difficulties with the organizational brass, and a stolen Range Rover to talk about. Back in 2014 and 15, Mitch Marner was a highly touted prospect for the London Knights in the ultra-competitive Ontario Hockey League. Even in a league where he consistently had to compete against Connor McDavid, Marner held his own very well, even scoring more points than McDavid in 2015. His playmaking and shot creation alongside his defensive instincts making him equally deadly on the penalty kill were enough to place him in the upper echelon of prospects heading to the NHL draft that same year. Marner would eventually go fourth overall to our other subject of today, the Toronto Maple Leafs. At this point in time, the Leafs were in a complete freefall. After what was supposed to be the start of something beautiful for the organization, the failure to build properly around the massive signings they'd made to Phil Kessel and Dion Phaneuf had completely blown up in their faces. However, things were starting to trend in the correct direction following the hiring of Brendan Shanahan as president of hockey operations. Intent on digging the Leafs out of the tire-spinning rut that general manager Dave Nonis had spent them into, a complete overhaul was needed. Captain Dion, you can get shipped off to the little brother in Ottawa. Feel the thrill, have fun winning back-to-back cups in Pittsburgh, you are never winning them here. Head coach Randy Carlyle, you and Nonis can open each other's parachutes as you get thrown off the CN Tower together. It's time for the Shana plan. With nearly everyone being ousted, it was time to bring in the new faces of management. At general manager, the man who drafted Shanahan in the first place, Lou Lamoriello. A master of the art form, having turned the Devils from a constant work in progress to a juggernaut. When your draft acumen includes Scott Niedermayer and Martin Brodeur, you've cemented yourself in history as one of the greats. For head coach, enter Mike Babcock, a no-nonsense taskmaster whose methodical approach behind the bench won him a cup with the Red Wings in 2008. With the managerial core overhauled, all focus can be directed towards the product on the ice. So where does Marner fit into all of this? Within the span of a few years, Marner had become a key member of what became known in Toronto as the Core Four, alongside fellow draft prospects William Nylander and Austin Matthews, as well as the free agent signing of John Tavares. Marner was also the first draft pick the Leafs made in the Babcock and Lamoriello era. There's just one problem. Babcock didn't want Marner. Babcock apparently had his eyes set on Noah Hanifin, who went one spot later to Carolina, but was superseded by Mark Hunter, the Leafs' assistant general manager at the time, who co-owned the London Knights. Being openly unwanted by the head coach, however, was just one of the many difficulties Marner would run into early in his career. While the team had screwed him out of various bonuses on his rookie contract and even forced him onto the fourth line on many occasions, perhaps the biggest story was that of Listgate. During a confidential meeting with Marner, Babcock asked him to develop a list of the hardest working players on the team at the time. Already a weird ask, especially for a rookie, but you'd expect that list to be kept between the player and the coach, not shared with other members of the team, and especially not those listed at the bottom. He's a rookie for Carlton's sake, have some discretion. The heartwarming part is that Tyler Bozak and Nazem Kadri, the two listed at the bottom, confronted Babcock about this being way out of line, asking Marner to do this. This sort of hazing of a rookie would get anyone else blacklisted, let alone fired. But it took a 6-game losing streak in 2019, and more information coming out about his previous manipulative and borderline abusive tactics on the Red Wings and Ducks for the Leafs to finally fire Babcock and replace him with assistant head coach Sheldon Keefe. The mental hell of playing under Babcock notwithstanding, Marner had started to develop into a star in the NHL on his rookie contract, with an impressive 94-point campaign in the 2018-19 season to lead into the off-season contract negotiations. After Lamoriello was told to take a nap on Long Island the previous year, New general manager Kyle Dubas was ready to usher the Leafs into an era to remember. Having already made big splashes in the past year with the signings of Tavares, Matthews, and Nylander, Dubas was all in on keeping the core four around for as long as he could. However, any and all concepts of a harmonious negotiation were quickly thrown out the window by Marner's agent, Darren Ferris. If you thought Louis Gross played to the media too hard in my Swayman video, you haven't seen anything yet. Ferris's media antics as they pertain to Marner started less than 24 hours after Auston Matthews signed in February of 2019. With the rich sums being paid out to the other members of the core four, Ferris had complained to the Toronto media sources that the Leafs were significantly lowballing Marner. The entire offseason, Ferris, alongside Marner's dad, had repeatedly strong-armed the Leafs in negotiations, forcing them into a position to either drastically overpay for Marner or have him not play at all. Seeing as Dubas had just gone through similar negotiations with Gross the prior year with Nylander, he capitulated to every demand made by Ferris in September of 2019, signing Marner to 6 years for just under $11 million per year. However, while many believe that the annual value was too much to stomach, the devil was deeper in the details. Final 2 years, full no movement clause. In order for Marner to be traded, he would need to willingly void that clause. But that's fine, right? That's a problem for future Mitch Marner, future Darren Ferris, and future Kyle Dubas to figure out. Only problem right now is future Marner and future Ferris. Dubas was fired shortly after his end-of-season press conference following the second-round playoff defeat to the Florida Panthers in 2023. In this conference, Dubas had indicated that with the best this core four had achieved in 5 years being a singular playoff series win, immediately followed by being bounced in 5 games to the Florida Panthers, there was very little that could be done to improve the team without breaking up the core. Shanahan instead doubled down on his belief in the core and fired Dubas, replacing him with Brad Treliving just 5 weeks before Marner's full no-movement clause kicked in. With this in mind, the time to do anything with Marner was right then, in those 5 weeks. However, because Shanahan believed so hard in the core four, any movement of Marner would essentially have to happen over his dead body. And thus, Marner was resigned to 2 more years of growing resentment of the organization. However, within the last year, things have grown dicey. It's been evident that Marner has wanted out of Toronto for a while. Despite his amicable relationship with the city prior to his contract negotiations, the Sisyphean story of playoff failure for the Leafs, the damage Ferris did to his reputation with the lowballing comments, constant heckling from fans following disappointing playoff appearances, and the fact that someone hijacked his Range Rover with his wife in it at gunpoint had seriously fractured Marner's relationship with the organization and the city. In the 2024 offseason, the writing was on the wall that Marner would need to be moved. However, as previously mentioned, the easiest time to do so was the 5 weeks between Treliving's hiring and his no-movement clause kicking in. While there were certainly ways the Leafs could have twisted Marner's arm into voiding his no-movement clause, it would be exceedingly difficult. Hi, this is me from the editing bay. I realize that this trade happened a decade and a half ago, so I'm going to need to provide some important context behind it. In an effort to make the team significantly younger, then Leafs general manager Brian Burke had wanted to trade Thomas Kaberle, who was one of the longest tenured Leafs at the time. However, Kaberle was on a no-trade clause, so what did Burke do to try and circumvent that? Burke and head coach Ron Wilson sat Kaberle every single game until Kaberle returned to them a list of teams that he wanted to be traded to. Kaberle eventually relented, returning a list that included only the Boston Bruins. Gotta make do with what you got, so the Leafs traded Kaberle to the Boston Bruins for a 2011 first-round pick, a 2012 second-round pick, and Joe Colborne. The Leafs would use that first-round pick to trade up with Anaheim to select Tyler Biggs, pause for laughter, while Anaheim would use that pick to select Ricard Raquel, pause for double laughter. The second-round pick, through a series of unfortunate events, ended up in the hands of the Dallas Stars, who used it to select Mike Winther, who never made the NHL. They could have had Jordan Martinook or Damon Severson. Wonderful. And Colborne ended up playing a staggering 16 games for the Leafs across 3 seasons. Meanwhile, Kaberle ended up winning a cup with the Bruins. Thanks, Toronto. The point here, however, is not that the Leafs suck at personnel decisions. The point is that a no-trade clause or a no-movement clause is not necessarily a complete dead end. There are ways around it if you try. You might permanently fracture your relationship with this player, but if you're desperate enough, you can absolutely brute force your way out of a no trade or no movement clause. Now back to the video. But with a talent so clearly disillusioned with his place in the organization, it shouldn't be too tough to get him to relent. Ferris was even posturing before the season about potentially trying to force his way out of Toronto, and the team was ready to start shopping him. So why didn't he do it when he had the chance? At the trade deadline, the Leafs were reportedly in on Mikko Rantanen, who has been lighting it up this postseason. Marner would have been the key talent going back to Carolina. And many were puzzled by the fact that he didn't take up the offer if he was this fed up with the team. Simple. His decision had nothing to do with hockey. His wife was expecting in roughly a month. And as much as we want to act as though athletes are above it all, at the end of the day, they're human beings whose first priority is always to provide for their family. To ask him to void the no movement clause for this transaction so close to the birth of his new son put so much unnecessary stress of moving and applying for American citizenship under this administration, and so much else on the shoulders of Marner and his wife. Instead, Marner rode out the rest of the season and the rest of his contract with the Toronto Maple Leafs, which brings us to the last point of discussion. With all the hubbub surrounding the off-ice drama finally out of the way, it's time to finally address Marner's performance on the ice. Mitch Marner is, regardless of what critics may claim, one of the best wingers in the entire National Hockey League. Ever since the 2019 season, he's consistently played over a point per game. While not an elite goal scorer, his playmaking ability has put him only behind Nikita Kucherov, Nathan MacKinnon, and Connor McDavid in assists since 2019. In just 9 seasons with the club, Marner's production has placed him in the top 5 of Leafs history in points, assists, and points per game. Though he's only produced one 100-point season so far, his production in years past had put him on track for over 100 on several occasions before getting derailed by injuries. Or, a worldwide pandemic. Even when he's not producing in the points column, his defensive metrics are still very strong. As a mainstay on Toronto's penalty kill, he's done more than enough to put him in annual Selke contention. There's very little to suggest that Marner is anything less than elite. However, that elite standing really only extends to the regular season. It's been the worst kept secret in hockey that Marner is damn near useless in the playoffs. Through 9 consecutive seasons of postseason disappointment, Marner has far and away been the most consistently frustrating player on the Leafs. While on the surface, 63 points in 70 playoff games sounds like a marginal drop-off in production from his regular season stats, the devil is, once again, in the details. Only 13 of those points are from goals. There is not a single postseason in which Marner has scored more than 3 goals. And frequently, his production gets outpaced by other members of the team that play much smaller roles. While this has certainly been the case in the past, with many pointing to his stat line in the 2021 series against Montreal, this 2025 postseason may be the worst of it. Though the Leafs had forced Florida into a Game 7 situation before being run out of their own barn 6-1, Marner was virtually absent, with only 2 shots on goal through the entire last 5 games, reinforcing a trend that he is atrocious in an extended playoff series. Understandably, stretches of inefficiency get Marner really frustrated, and it's resulted in plenty of moments of him visibly showcasing said frustration. Many of you may be intimately familiar at this point with 2 recent instances. There's this one of him in Game 7 of the aforementioned Florida series this year, shouting at his teammates to wake the fuck up. And my personal favorite, his reaction to William Nylander in Game 4 of the 2024 first round against the Bruins. However, the biggest may be one that isn't even in the playoffs, but what I would still assert as the moment the Leafs lost their window, short of allowing Zach Hyman to walk. You seeing what he's done in Edmonton these past 2 years? Toronto could really use a guy like that on their roster. Early in the 2022-23 season, the Leafs had been on a rough skid and were facing the last place Anaheim Ducks. They got out to a 3-1 lead, and then 2 really rough goals for Anaheim come off of plays from Marner. Keefe is grilling him on the bench until he goes down the tunnel. He brings the stick with him just to smash it on the brick wall of the tunnel and sit in the back for a while before coming back out as if nothing had changed. And then Keefe plays him anyway in overtime as if he didn't walk out on his team for several minutes, and then they lose anyway. Wonderful. What a necessary temper tantrum to throw 10 games into the season against the worst team in hockey. And it doesn't even just manifest in those big blowups. It's also in the little moments. It's in half of his playoff penalty minutes coming from just launching the puck over the glass. It's a poorly advised spinorama pass to no one leading to a Jesper Boakvist goal. It's so many little aspects to his game that get thrown off with his temper and, as a result, hamstring the team into covering up his mistakes. Which takes us back to today. Starting July 1st, Mitch Marner is set to become a free agent for the first time in his career. Between his irreparable relationship with the organization and the city, Tavares potentially pricing himself out of a new contract, and the calls from the fanbase to trade Matthews, the days of the core four in Toronto are all but over. In a particularly weak free agency pool, Marner stands alone as the most highly coveted prize this year. The only issue is the price tag. Despite the salary cap ceiling drastically increasing over the next few years, Marner's asking price is far from cheap, with Ferris potentially asking for upwards of $13 million per year. And though his playoff numbers are downright putrid, his regular season performances indicate that he's very much worth whatever people are willing to give up for him. Though the media circus of Toronto may be something he can get away from, putting that much money on him is still a gamble. A gamble that he can keep up his production likely into his mid-30s. A gamble that he can start to produce more efficiently in the playoffs. A gamble that he can keep his head on straight in times of immense pressure. And a gamble that he can absorb the culture of whatever team that takes him on for likely the last big contract of his career. It's tough to fall out of love with the team that drafted you, let alone the team you've rooted for your whole life. But when things get this untenable, it might be time to watch the party die.